Hi, this is a short description of how to collect qualitative data and how to analyze it. The first thing I've been talking about is interviewing. Interviewing is our main tool in most qualitative research. This is where we get the main bulk of data. So of course, interviewing is something we should focus very much on. A number of studies only do interviews. This is okay. So how do we make an interview? The first thing is, how can we ask questions? How can we set up a semi-structured interview guide? It's not so important what's in the interview guide. It's really more important how we use it. We should try to achieve something that is very similar to a normal conversation where we control the conversation. So the interview guide should not be followed very systematic. It's more like a checklist that we make sure that we cover all the theme the best we can. So it's more like guiding the interviewee around the checklist, making sure that everything is actually covered. And this can be done very naturally by saying, for instance, now you mentioned this theme. How do you feel about this thing in relation to that? You can do something like that. So it appears to the person being interviewed that this is just a normal conversation that they're part of. You should also not interrupt more than necessary. Just, guide, use these sort of probing questions. Also, you can, repeat the last word if you want to have something more said about a theme. Or you can say, could you elaborate a little bit about this? So these are some things that you should have in mind. You could say, if you want people to elaborate a little bit more. It's important that you ask the easy question first. Let people maybe just ask them to tell a little bit about their job. This is probably something you don't need. It will never make it into the thesis, but it gives the interview a sense of comfort, and you start gaining some trust. Then once you sort of got to know the person a little bit better, after they've told you a lot of stuff, you can ask a bit more sensitive questions. I often have the trick that at the very last of the interview, I say, well, could you say something the most positive about this workplace, for instance? And then they tell you about that, and then say, oh, what is then the most negative? And then, since they first say something positive, it's easier for them also to say something critical. And if we are to to make a good qualitative thesis, we should not only have positive issues, we should also have something we can discuss. There should be some tension. So therefore, it's good to have also some negative questions. You should try to transcribe the interview because it's very good for making the analysis if you had something in transcription. Now I'm going to go to the documents. Documents I'll cover very quickly. They can be used as the basis for instance to compare to interviews. For instance, if there's a specific strategy in the organization and you can clearly see from interviews that people are not following it, then you can use documents. You can also use documents to provide context. How many people are there in the organization? These kind of things. Those are the most useful thing about documents. The good thing about documents is that they're sort of objective source. They're not subjective. Observations can be really strong if you use them correctly. It does, however, take a long time to actually do observation because you're not going to see great stuff all the time. So when you observe, you may have to stay in the organization for quite a while. It is possible, for instance, if you already work in the organization, that you can use some of your experiences as observations. These observations can be about what people actually do. How are people's behavior? What is it that people do in everyday life? Maybe this can be linked to, for instance, material from a document or material from an interview. It can sometimes be contrasted that people say something, but they do something differently. And if you can find these differences between what people say and what people do, what the organizations state and what the actual reality is, that is a good story that can be put into a thesis. Observations can be of behavior, but it can also be observations of things on the wall, things in the parking lot, things in the canteen. These can be useful, for instance, to say something about, if people have cartoons about the management in the offices, it can be useful to say something about the management attitude or the structure of the organization. Maybe that is a flat structure and you're allowed to criticize the manager. Or it can also, how people park. Are there designated parking lots for the directors? Or is it not everybody, first gets first? These things can be useful sometimes to actually say something useful about the organization. Analysis is about breaking up the data. When you have done a lot of interviews, say 6 to 10 interviews, you get a lot of pages of data material, maybe 50 pages. And sometimes just going through them in hand or scrolling in the computer can be too much. So you need to break it down to more conceivable categories. You should do the analysis as soon as possible because it can give you good ideas for coming interviews. It's not like you have to do all interviews in the same way. If you learn something, you can include that learning in the next interview. Maybe something you don't need anymore. Maybe you need more information about a specific upcoming theme. Then you should include that in your interview guide and keep using that. You will discover that more easily if you start the analysis as soon as possible. So, analysis is about creating different themes, making a theme analysis. So you try to find different patterns of behavior in the data, and these themes you try to categorize in maybe overcategories and subcategories. Usually the categories will be closely linked to questions in your interview guide, so that you have, if you have, for instance, 5 main questions, you will get 5 main categories. But then there can also be subcategories that you should include. These themes can well be based on something that is very local. For instance, the local could use a description of another department. They could call the other department, let's say, the Red Army, because it has a lot of Russian programmers in it. So this is a good, thing to use as a theme because it describes something very important in that field. When we do notice a theme, we code it. We produce some small codes, which are basically, it's small headers, very short headers that we use to label the text. The text can be labeled using in vivo, a program, or it can just be used by hand. Since you don't have so many pages, maybe you have 50, you don't have thousands of pages, sometimes it's not really worth it to set it up in a program, but just doing it in hand and moving the text bit into a Word document will sometimes or often do. Then once you've created the codes for the whole text, you have main codes and subcodes, you can make displays. This display is an index tree. An index tree has maybe some top quotes, and then under that it has subquotes. So it will allow you to go more and more detail into an issue as you move down along the tree. Another way to do is to do the matrix coding, where you can have codes on one side and then you can have maybe another sort of codes on the other side. So it could be, for instance, the marketing department, the sales department, and the production department. And then you can have up here hierarchy, leadership style, whatever. These can also be used to give you a clear picture of what you have of data, what stories are in it. The basic idea of doing the coding is to identify the good storyline, what we usually call a meta-narrative summation. A meta-narrative summation is the story, the best story you can sort of create out of the data that's interesting for the reader to listen to. Finally, headlines. When we are coming a bit further, we have used quotes, we have some text. If quotes are very long, we move them in, and if quotes are short, we have them just in the text. But what's important is that headlines we use to guide the reader. Usually in a master thesis, I would say there's something like 3 main headlines for the data section would be appropriate. So these headlines, they do not have to have only one code. They can have, for instance, a headline that links 2 different codes to each other. So it can be the leadership in the hierarchy or something like that, which means that you link 2 different codes together to create a good story. What is really important, as I said, is to create this meta-narrative summation. The meta-narrative summation, if it's possible to get it, this is more than just displaying your codes. This is creating some kind of storyline that present the learnings and the tension you find in the field, not just presenting, I have found 15 different themes or 15 different codes. From many aspects, this can be seen as just the first step. It's better if you can actually create some learning story from your data.